Hi, fourth graders. We are back today to talk more about immigration and our freedoms here in America. So if you remember, we talked about those objectives we're going to focus on this whole week. Today, specifically, we are going to be able to describe the process that immigrants went through to come to America. We're going to think about what they needed to do before they left their home country. We're going to see what it was like as they traveled on the ship to America. And then we're going to watch a video to see what happened when they got here. Where did they go? What did it look like? So those are our goals for today. I want you to be thinking throughout our lesson today about getting ready to leave. And you're leaving your home and you're going to a whole new place. And I want you to think, what would you take with you? Now remember, this is back in the 1900s. You're leaving home and you only have a small suitcase. You can take one small suitcase. So your assignment at the end of our lesson today is going to be packing up this suitcase you see on your page here. So you're going to need to think about 5 things that you can put in your suitcase. Remember, you'll be wearing your clothes, so you don't have to add that in your suitcase. Then you're going to choose 2 things to write about down here and tell us why you decided to pack those things. So be thinking. We're going to read together what the trip was like that many immigrants had to make a better life in America. So I want you to follow along with me on the journey to America. For many, the trip to America was long and difficult. Remember that many immigrants came to America because of economic hardship or difficulties caused by having too little money in their home country. How would they afford this expensive trip to America? In the early 1900s, immigrants came to America on steamships. The average trip from Europe lasted about 10 days. Some trips lasted longer. Those who were wealthy could afford first-class or second-class tickets. Passengers with these tickets had private cabins aboard the steamship and better quality food, which they ate in the dining room, separate from their sleeping quarters. So that sounds pretty nice for those first and second class passengers, right? But for the most, however, being poor meant they could only afford third class tickets in the steerage section of the steamship. The only way most people could afford the voyage was to travel in steerage. This was the area far below the main deck, on the lowest level of the ship. The area was dark and cramped. There was no fresh air. Hundreds of people would be crammed into this crowded, dark space, which was lined with simple, narrow bunks. Ooh, if I were in that section, I know I would not do well on that boat. On the long voyage, the sleeping quarters in steerage would become dirty and smelly. This space was where passengers slept, and also where they ate. They were given lower quality food than the wealthier passengers in cabins above. Steerage passengers usually had only very basic, minimal facilities for bathing. They often spent as much time as possible on the open-air upper deck to escape the dismal conditions in steerage. Whew, it does not sound pleasant being down in that steerage. I don't blame them for wanting to go up top. Maybe think about what they would have been doing up on the upper decks during the day so they could get some fresh air. The trip to America was not always a safe one in the early 1900s. Storms and high waves occasionally led to shipwrecks. Illness spread quickly in crammed quarters, and many passengers became sick during their trip. Many passengers experienced seasickness because of the wavy, bumpy ride across the ocean. After 1900, each steamship had a doctor on board. That doctor was usually the only doctor caring for several hundred passengers. Imagine taking this trip to a new and unfamiliar country. Do you think this difficult journey was worth it for people who came to America during this time? I want you to turn and talk to your neighbor about the trip. Do you think it was worth it for those people? Turn and talk. So we're going to take a peek at this map and see the journey that they took across the ocean and once they got into New York City. So you can see here that the steamships came from Europe and crossed over the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and then they made their way up into the New York Harbor into this area. The Statue of Liberty, which you saw on our first slide, sits right here on a small island in New York Harbor. And it's that symbol of our freedom in America, which so many people were traveling for. And so on the ships, the passengers would be cheering when they saw the statue. They knew they were finally in America. They traveled a little bit farther up here to Ellis Island, and that served as our immigration station from 1892 until 1954. Those third-class passengers, remember they were the ones in the steerage, arrived in the New York Harbor, and they had to stop at Ellis Island and go through a whole series of inspections and interviews, and we'll get to talk more about that in another day. When the first and second class passengers, those people that had enough money for a private room on the board, when they passed their inspections, they were free to enter America through this southwestern tip of Manhattan. Those third class passengers, remember, were still over here at Ellis Island for inspections. So that's kind of the trip that they took once they got into New York City. So now we're going to do a little bit of exploring. First, we're going to watch this video, and it's going to show us some real footage of when passengers were arriving at Ellis Island. After we do that, you're going to have a chance to go do some exploring on your own. You're going to use this QR code, and you're going to scan that, and you're going to get to do an interactive tour of Ellis Island. And you'll be able to click around and just explore and see what it's like there. So let's start by watching this video.
Many Americans can trace their roots back to Ellis Island in New York Harbor. Over 12 million immigrants were cross-examined here on the final stage of their journey to a new land. People of many different nationalities had one common goal: to become Americans. The Ellis Island Immigration Station opened on January 1st, 1892. The very first person to arrive was Annie Moore, a teenager from Ireland, traveling with her two younger brothers. All immigrants in first and second class were seen very quickly at the pier, whereas steerage passengers were put on a ferry straight to Ellis Island, where they waited in long lines to be seen. They were met first by an interpreter who made sure everyone fully understood the process. Without the help of an interpreter, many more immigrants would have been turned away because of the language barrier. Then they were led up a steep flight of stairs. Unaware of the first test they were already being given, a doctor stood at the top of the steps and checked for signs of medical weakness, such as shortness of breath. The doctor scanned each immigrant for about 6 seconds. If they didn't pass, they were marked with a letter in chalk that represented a medical condition and would then have to go through a more intense physical that could last days rather than seconds. Next came the questions, 29 of them, such as, "Do you have money?" and "Do you have family in the United States?" Then they were given their landing cards and the chance to exchange money before taking a ferry to the mainland. Some continued their journey on to other parts of the country. Many immigrants were met by family members, reunited after years apart. Now, at last, they were ready to start their new lives as Americans.
So you can see from watching that video that even through the long, hard journey that they took across the Atlantic Ocean and through the inspections and the interviews, that the immigrants were so excited to be in America, to have new freedoms and be in a new home. So now you are going to get to explore and go to this tour of Ellis Island. And so I'm going to have you scan this QR code, and you are going to be taken to this website. You'll click right here on Start the Tour, and from there you are free to explore. When you are finished with that, don't forget, you're going to come back and do your assignment of filling up that suitcase. What would you pack on your journey? You can illustrate or write 5 things in your suitcase. And you're going to pick 2 of those items to tell us about down here and why you're packing those. So go ahead and come back to scan this QR code. Have fun exploring, and we'll see you tomorrow.